For years, viewers have admired Craig Melvin for the calm steadiness he brings to Today, a composure that feels reassuring to those who rise early, pour their coffee, and look for clarity in a complicated world. Yet behind that polished presence lies a quieter tension that many men and women in their early 60s know all too well. The pressure to resolve feelings instantly, to package emotion into something tidy and consumable before the next commercial break. In an era of rapid headlines and fleeting attention, Craig has often felt the subtle insistence that grief be summarized, outrage be measured, and healing be hinted at within minutes, as though human experience were a script with a predictable third act. And this demand for instant emotional resolution began to weigh on him more heavily than the long hours or the public scrutiny ever did. Because deep down, he understood that real sorrow does not conform to production schedules. After particularly difficult interviews, parents recounting loss, communities grappling with tragedy, he would leave the studio with a sense that something unfinished trailed behind him, a feeling that the conversation had been respectfully handled, yet inevitably compressed. And it was in those quiet car rides home that the unresolved fragments surfaced, questions lingering in his mind about whether empathy can truly be expressed in sound bites. His wife, Lindsay Charniak, who has navigated her own demanding career at networks like ESPN, recognized the strain, not because he complained, but because she saw the subtle signs, the way he stared a moment longer at the evening news, the way his voice softened when their children asked about his day, the way fatigue seemed less physical and more spiritual. For couples who have spent decades balancing careers, raising families, caring for aging parents, and managing life's inevitable disappointments, there is a shared understanding that some things cannot be hurried, that true resolution arrives slowly and often without fanfare. And Lindsay would remind Craig, gently and without judgment, that he was not responsible for tying a ribbon around every story, that bearing witness is sometimes enough. Yet the media landscape rarely rewards patience, and Craig found himself wrestling with the expectation that a segment should not only inform, but reassure, that viewers must be guided toward a sense of closure, even when the facts themselves remain raw and evolving. A challenge that resonates deeply with those in their 60 to 65-year-old season of life who have learned that closure is rarely neat, that marriages endure through seasons rather than speeches, that grief softens over years rather than days. Craig began to reflect on his own upbringing in South Carolina, on lessons about resilience and faith that emphasized endurance over expediency, and he realized that the tension he felt was not weakness, but conscience, a quiet resistance to the idea that complex human emotions can be resolved on cue. In conversations with Lindsay on their porch after long days, the skyline dimming into twilight, he confessed that sometimes he feared viewers might mistake composure for indifference, that in striving to remain professional, he might seem untouched, when in truth, he carried many of those stories long after the broadcast ended. And Lindsay, with the perspective of someone who has stood on sidelines during heartbreaking losses and triumphant victories alike, reminded him that authenticity does not require spectacle, that a steady presence can itself be an act of compassion. Over time, Craig adopted small practices to honor the emotional residue of his work, lingering a few extra minutes with guests off camera, writing personal notes, allowing himself moments of silence before transitioning to lighter topics, not as acts of rebellion against the pace of television, but as affirmations that real feeling deserves space. And as he did, something shifted, not in ratings or headlines, but within his own sense of integrity. Viewers, especially those who have lived long enough to see cultural tides rise and fall, seemed to sense the difference, responding to the quiet sincerity in his delivery, the thoughtful pauses that suggested reflection rather than rush. And letters arrived from retirees who spoke of their own struggles with society's demand to move on too quickly after loss or change, thanking him for modeling a steadiness that felt honest. Craig's private struggle was never about fame or fatigue, but about fidelity to the truth of people's experiences and to his own emotional well-being.
and in navigating that tension, he discovered that instant resolution is often an illusion, a narrative convenience rather than a lived reality, and that his role was not to provide final answers, but to illuminate the path forward with clarity and care. Lindsay's steadfast partnership became both anchor and compass, her understanding gaze a reminder that the most meaningful resolutions unfold in kitchens and living rooms, in whispered conversations and shared silences, far from studio lights. For an audience standing at a reflective stage of life, contemplating what truly lasts, Craig's journey offers reassurance that integrity sometimes means resisting the rush, that compassion can be deliberate rather than dramatic, and that acknowledging unfinished emotions is not a professional failure but a human strength. Each morning, as the familiar music of the show rises and cameras come alive, Craig steps into his role with renewed intention, aware that while the world may crave swift conclusions, the deeper work of empathy unfolds at its own pace. And in choosing to honor that rhythm, even within the constraints of live television, he embodies a quiet courage that resonates with those who know that life's most profound resolutions are rarely instant, but always worth the wait.